Welcome to the Disney Wedding Podcast. This show is brought to you by Carrie Hayward's Fairy Tale Weddings Guide, the only guidebook and bridal organizer tailored exclusively to Disney's fairy tale weddings at Walt Disney World. I'm Carrie Hayward, and each week I feature Disney wedding updates, money-saving tips, and interviews with wedding vendors and real Disney couples. I also cover honeymoons, anniversaries, and engagements at the Disney parks and resorts. Join me now as the Disney Wedding Podcast celebrates romance at Disney destinations. Today on the Disney Wedding Podcast, I am speaking with Disney bride Amanda Holland about her ceremony at the Grand Californian's Brisa Courtyard with a reception at the Sequoia Room and her park shoot inside EPCOT at Walt Disney World. I thought you guys would be interested to hear how she chose these locations and how she planned everything and how it all turned out. So welcome, Amanda.
Hi, Carrie. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for being on the show today. I always like to start at the very beginning and find out how you guys decided that you wanted to have your wedding at Disneyland.
I have always loved Disney. I've been going to Disney my whole life, and the first adult purchase I made was a Disneyland annual pass. My fiance, husband now, on the other hand, only went for his grad night pretty much. But when we started dating, he started enjoying coming to the parks with me, and he was actually the first one to bring it up before we even got engaged. We saw a Disney bride at Disneyland, and he was like, "That's going to be you, isn't it?" And that was kind of my idea that he was going to approve of having a Disney wedding. And so that's when I kind of started researching it more and finding out whether or not it was going to be possible for us, which is when I stumbled upon your podcast and found out that, yes, it can be possible.
That's awesome. How did your friends and family react when they found out where the wedding was going to be?
All my side was very kind of like, yes, of course they're having their wedding at Disneyland. They're always at Disneyland. I think his side of the family might have been a little bit more surprised, not really like knowing much about Disney weddings or never even heard of a Disney wedding before. For the most part, we did have very positive feedback. I do have to say, though, I had that one coworker. She was like, "Is Mickey going to marry you?" Which I didn't think I was going to get that from anybody, but there you go. You do have like the one coworker who says that.
And the answer to that question is always, no, Goofy is.
Yeah, right.
So then how many guests did you guys invite and how many were able to make the trip?
We invited 105 and we had 80 RSVP positively since it was about a month and a half before. But we did have a couple drop out last minute, so we ended up with 73 total.
Did you do a room block for your guests?
No, I didn't do that. We did have, I'm not sure if Disneyland does things differently than Disney World and how like the room block works, but they did give us a group reservation link that is for your guests that you can send. They could book through that. So I did use that and I sent it to everybody who was going to be staying, but we didn't plan out a specific room block. But I did share that link with my guests.
Got it. How did you choose the day of the week and time of day for your event?
So we knew that we wanted to have it in the springtime. And when I was originally thinking of dates, 2 years in advance when I was first planning all of this, I thought having something like a palindrome might work out. So my thought was when we locked in on 2025, we can do 5/2/25, but that happened to be a Friday. And when I was contacting the sales manager, she said that corporate events book out a lot because we did want to have brunch. And so, but she said, since it was so far in advance, she said that 5/4 was available. And I said, "Oh my gosh, that's Star Wars Day. Of course, why didn't I think of that to begin with?" But we did initially, even when we were like first starting to plan, liked the idea of having brunch because we wanted to invite our guests to come with us to the parks afterwards. So that's how we kind of decided on having the earlier time and then just them letting us know that May the 4th was available. We couldn't pass up on that. So that's how we ended up deciding on Sunday, May 4th.
How did you choose your ceremony and reception venues?
So when I was first starting to plan, I was interested in doing the Rose Court Garden, but we really like the Grand. That's our favorite hotel, and we love staying there. It's just so gorgeous with all of the exposed wood and everything. So even when I was thinking of having a Rose Court Garden ceremony, I knew we wanted to have the reception at the Grand. And even though they're super close and within walking distance, we ultimately decided that it would be easier just to have everything at the same hotel because we were going to be staying there too. And it was going to be so early. So Brisa was beautiful. I went before and looked at all of the courtyards. And when they told us that the farther courtyard is also available, that kind of locked me in on wanting to have that location. Because Brisa 1, if you've seen kind of where how it lays out, that's the one that is closest to the walkway. And we've stayed there so much, even though they put up those little divider bushes, you still get looky-loos. So when they said that the farther courtyard is available, that kind of is like, okay, we can definitely have our nice outdoor ceremony with all of the trees and it's going to be gorgeous, and then have our reception in the ballroom at the Grand. Originally, we were going to do the Trillium Room, and that has a terrace so people can go outside to get air or whatever. But they called me maybe in October and said that because of all of the renovations that are going on with the hotel, the Trillium Room wouldn't be available. So they were able to move us to the Sequoia Room, which usually has a higher minimum because our estimated guest count was 80. The Sequoia Room is typically at least 120, but because the Trillium Room wasn't going to be available, they moved us as a courtesy to the Sequoia Room.
Got it. And I know when you use Brisa 1 for a ceremony or reception, you've got the monorail and it goes right overhead from where they set up the ceremony. With Brisa 3, like how do they set up the ceremony in relation to the monorail beam at that venue?
They gave us two options. They gave me directionals, as in one was facing east, I think, and one was facing north, but that doesn't mean much to me. So it's one either faces where the monorail comes. If you're sitting in the attendance, the monorail comes across on the right-hand side, or you can do it where the guests face the monorail. So you'd essentially be underneath, and when the guests look straight, they could see the monorail coming across from left to right. So that's how that's set up. So I chose to have the monorail coming on the side. So we were facing more the bigger trees.
Got it. How did you guys choose your officiant?
I, being the planner that I am, we knew we were going on a cruise for the honeymoon and I needed a new passport. So I didn't want to have to get a new passport twice. So we actually got legally married a few months back so that I can get my passport for the cruise. So we didn't necessarily need an ordained minister. And that was something we had like planned a little bit early on. So I have a very large family and we're all very family oriented. You know, we have really large Christmases, and my uncle, his name is John, is usually the entertainer of everybody. He's so outgoing and kind and welcoming in his home. And now Brendan too has come to really enjoy spending time with my uncle, which I also love. So we just thought that he would be a good person to have that both of us knew and trusted and would be able to know us well enough on a personal level, because we really didn't want to have somebody that we didn't know officiate. So my uncle, and he was great. And even though he's usually kind of a goofball and was joking around the entire rehearsal, he did very well with the ceremony and it brought a lot of people to tears.
Oh, that's wonderful. Did you have any kind of entertainment added to the ceremony or the reception?
The ceremony, we had a string trio. So there were three, and I can't even tell you what instruments they were. I didn't really get to see them at all, but it was beautiful. And they actually played through some of the pre-reception time, even though that wasn't the location, which was nice because we had some more photos after the ceremony and got to listen to them. So the string trio did a great job with our ceremony. And then for the reception, we did have a Disney DJ. His name is DJ Martin. And he kind of set up during the pre-reception as well. So he was ready for our first look in the room that Brendan and I did earlier on. So he was great. And then we had Mickey, Minnie, Chip, and Dale also invited to our reception.
Did you pick any special outfits for them?
Yeah, during our planning session, when I had initially said that I wanted to have these 4 characters, they gave us a few different options for them. So Mickey and Minnie were in their gold, I guess, New Year's Eve type outfits, suit for Mickey. So their gold outfits. And then Chip and Dale had their party outfits as well. I don't remember there being like too many options, but we did like the options that they gave us. So those were the ones that we chose.
Got it. Do you have any menu items or cake flavors that you would recommend?
We were planning on having a smaller cake with only 2 tiers. But then when we did our menu tasting, I don't remember if I just wanted to try it or what, but we had already chosen 2, the cookies and cream and the vanilla with like the fresh fruit. But I really want to try the churro cake. I think it was because I've heard so many other brides saying how great the churro cake is. So during our menu tasting, we got to try the churro cake, and I was like, there's no way I'm not having this at my wedding. So we ended up keeping our 2-tier cake with the Oreo on the bottom layer and the vanilla with the berries on the top layer. And then our sheet cake that we were going to distribute to the rest of the guests was that churro cake. So we did end up having 3 flavors. And the other awesome thing was I was a little bit worried because my maid of honor and best friend who had been helping me through all of my journey is gluten-free. And they originally told me that they couldn't do any gluten-free unless it was the entire cake, which really disappointed me. And I was like, can you at least please like make her a cupcake or something? And they ended up making one of the layers gluten-free. And I don't even know which one it was. It was so delicious. I don't know which was the gluten-free flavor. That ended up being super awesome. And they just did that. I don't know if it was any extra. I didn't incur any extra costs or anything. But I was glad that they were able to do that and pull that off. And that it was still delicious.
Any menu items you would recommend?
They put us like in a holding room instead of going to the pre-reception. When we were waiting, they brought us out some of our pre-reception items. There was like an avocado toast for like one of the pre-reception items that was so good. And there was a mushroom tart that was really good too. And I think I might have had too much of that before, because by the time it came for them making me a plate for the reception, I was not very hungry, which was such a shame. I was so disappointed because I know the one thing that so many people have said is like, eat your food, eat your food, eat your food. And I don't know if it was a combination of me eating the tartlet and the toast and whatever other tartlets that they brought in before, and like a bunch of adrenaline, but like I got my plate and I was like, I don't know how much of this I could eat. But I tried some of the steak and it was phenomenal. It was like a flank steak. It came with the brunch. It was a little bit rare, but it was so good. And the chicken was really good too. But their whole display that they put, I was unsure about having a brunch because of it not appearing to be fresh. But they did so good on the spread with the brunch. It was beautiful. And like everybody said, all of the food items were so good that unfortunately by the time they got to the omelet station, they'd already like filled their entire plate. So I did get a lot of really, really good positive feedback on the brunch buffet. So yeah, it seems like all of the food items with the Ferris Hill brunch were pretty good.
Now, not a lot of people know this, but when you have a Disney wedding anywhere at Aulani, at the Disney parks on either coast, on the Disney Cruise Line, you can do a portrait session inside one of the parks at Walt Disney World. So I was wondering how you guys decided, being from California, that you wanted to do a portrait session in EPCOT, maybe versus doing one at Disneyland.
I did consider having a portrait session on our coast. It is significantly more expensive than the Disney World photo shoots. That played a factor in it, but I did also know shortly after I introduced Brendan to Disneyland, I introduced him to Disney World as well. So by the time we got married, we had been to Disney World probably like 3 times together. And Epcot is our absolute favorite park. We spend so much time in Epcot. We love just going around the world and eating and drinking everything. So that also played a really big factor. We were already planning on going to Disney World for a few days for our honeymoon. So being able to book that session was pretty easy. We just did Epcot. I know they had told us a few years ago they would try to squeeze in two if you're doing Epcot because it opens a little bit later, but they weren't allowing that anymore. And so we were getting up so early for the wedding day and then traveling to Florida and then having to get up really early for the park photo session that we only decided to do one. But they did tell us that we can come back and add another park. So that is something I am definitely putting on my to-do list.
Which locations inside Epcot did you choose?
We chose World Celebration, which included Spaceship Earth, the gardens kind of in the front, and Cosmic Rewind, which is our absolute favorite ride. I did ask them if we could do Moana as well, but it's just too far. And with the amount of photos that they take in each location and how detailed it is, I don't think we would have been able to make it to Moana anyways. So yeah, we got photos in front of Guardians, Spaceship Earth, and then kind of all around the World Celebration Gardens area, which was super awesome because it's now the Flower and Garden Festival. So they have all of like the topiaries of the different characters. So we got to take some photos in front of some really beautiful flower arrangements. It was really awesome.
Can you give my listeners a timeline of how your wedding day ran?
So hair and makeup arrived at 3:45 in the morning at our villa at the Grand Californian. We are going to have myself, my maid of honor, my mom, and my sister all get professional hair and makeup done. So they arrived at 3:45, like sharp. They were there right at 3:45 in the morning. But they were pretty efficient and they got us all done pretty quickly. So we started doing hair and makeup. Photo and video actually both arrived at 5:30. So they ended up coming together, which I think with the vendors that I chose, Plug Films and White Rabbit, they're the two preferred for Disneyland, and they've worked together so much and so well that it was almost like they were from like one company. Like they knew each other, they knew how to work with each other, they were super efficient. Yeah, so they got there at 5:30 and they started taking detail shots while all of us were still getting ready. And then at about 7 a.m. was when we did the robe photos and the dress photos and that kind of finishing up, getting ready up still in the room. And then 7:30, we did our first look. And so Brendan was already down there. They had already finished his photos. And I went down and we did our first look. And then family photos started at 8:15. And we were able to actually get a lot of the bridal party, the groomsmen, like the whole wedding party, and a lot of family photos all before the ceremony, which I thought was super efficient and made me feel pretty great about. We kept a really good schedule. We were on time for basically the entire timeline that the photographer had given me. We were on it. We were on time. We were totally with schedule, which was something I totally loved. So we did have a little bit of time after all that was done. I think it was about 9 a.m. when all of the photos that we were going to do before the ceremony were done. So they let me go into another different kind of like holding room where I can kind of breathe and take my shoes off for a second. And so I had a little bit of downtime there. And then my planner came in at about 9:20 and said, "We need to start now. It's raining." And it had sprinkled a little bit earlier on, but our ceremony wasn't supposed to start until 9:30. But she said, if we start, they can't move us. So I said, okay, we're going to start a few minutes early. So I got my shoes back on, was starting to feel a little nervous hearing that it was going to be raining again because I had hoped for like the whole weekend, basically, essentially the whole time I've been planning my wedding is I didn't want it to rain. I wanted to have my wedding outside. So I think that little bit of news kind of shook me a bit, but it ended up being totally fine. We were able to keep it outside. It wasn't downpour. It was just kind of sprinkling and misting. It did make for good photos afterwards when the floor was kind of wet. It looked a little bit more like glossy and stuff. So the ceremony was pretty quick. I think we were done by like 9:50. And then the cocktail hour did have to be moved inside. So our pre-reception ended up going from originally scheduled to be in Brisa 1 to the wisteria room. So they set up our pre-reception in the wisteria room. Brendan and I did not end up even going in that room, but we hadn't really got any decor for it anyways. So I don't think we missed too much, and they brought us the food and a couple drinks from there. We took a few more photos after the ceremony, and then at 10:40, our planner and our day of coordinator allowed Brendan and I to preview the reception room alone before anybody else got to see it, which I thought was super special and nice. We had a private first dance and got to see all of everything set up and kind of just take it in for about 20 minutes before they brought everybody in. And then the reception started at 11. We had the welcome toast and a couple speeches. We had the characters, I believe, were from 12:30 to 1 and then 1 to 1:30. We had to separate them. And then, yeah, everything in the reception was pretty much done by 2 because that's when photo and video were done. But the reception went until 3. And that was the end of the wedding day, and we went to the parks afterwards and then caught a flight to Orlando at 10 p.m.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So out of all of this, what ended up being your favorite memory of your wedding day?
I have a few. So I really, for me, I really loved our first look. It was misting a little bit at that point too, and I was just so nervous in my heels, and I think being able to see Brendan before kind of calmed both of our nerves about the whole day and about everything, and all of the stresses kind of melted away for a while. Just like being able to have that moment with him was super special. So because it was Star Wars Day, we wanted our friends' kids who were our ring bearer and flower girl. We were like, you guys can dress up as Star Wars characters if you want. And so when I first saw them, they were coming a little bit earlier to do photos too. They were dressed up as Darth Vader and Princess Leia, and that just made me so happy. I was like, oh my gosh, and this is happening. This is Star Wars Day. We're getting married on Star Wars Day. That was super awesome. And to kind of go off of that, where we were in the Brisa Courtyard, I guess it was super close to downtown Disney. And throughout the whole ceremony, I didn't hear any of the downtown Disney music. I don't know what time they started, but literally as we were exchanging our rings, we heard the downtown Disney music over our string trio, and it was playing like the Star Wars main theme, which was just so wild. Like the perfect timing that we heard the music and everybody heard it, and I like looked up like, where is that coming from? So that was super special. I think those were some of my favorite memories of the day.
When you guys were planning, what were some of the most important aspects of the event where you focused your attention or your budget?
I definitely spent a lot of time figuring out what I wanted to do for photo and video. That was something that was super important to me from the beginning. It was one of those, I will cut everything but my photographers and videographers. That was definitely one of my top priorities. And then I also spent a lot of time going back and forth with my planner about the food items and the bar that we had. And I think that was just more of like the effort that I was putting into it, because I wanted to make sure that it was going to be enjoyable for the guests. Like I said, my maid of honor and I have an uncle too who have like severe dietary restrictions, and I wanted to make sure that they would have something. So I went back and forth a lot, like making sure that we had items that they were able to eat, as well as with the bar. One of the things that I really wanted to do was have like a his and hers drink. And even though it was early in the morning, like a lot of our guests, like we know a lot of our guests, they like their alcohol. So we knew that they were going to be utilizing the bar no matter what time it was, because at Disney, it's 5 o'clock somewhere, you know? So I went back and forth with my planner quite a bit because I had already gotten the open bar, the maximum package that you could get. And she was telling me that if I wanted to have a specialty drink, that they were going to charge me extra per drink that I wanted. And I didn't really understand. And to this day, I still don't really understand why I was getting so much like pushback for that. So it took several emails going back and forth of like, please explain to me why I can't have a drink when we're going to have an open bar regardless. And ultimately, her answer was that if we're promoting a certain beverage with a certain type of alcohol, that's going to be consumed more than others. So they need to get more of that than they would have planned to, which I suppose is an acceptable answer, but it still wasn't enough really for me because I felt I was already spending enough on the bar. Um, so what ended up happening, and it was a little funny, like I chose a variation of a mimosa, and Brendan, after all of this, was like, you know what? Never mind. I'm not gonna have a drink. So my cousin made the sign for me saying, here's Amanda's drink. It's a mimosa or whatever, because it was super simple and didn't require any like specialty mixing or anything like that. Um, and Brendan just didn't get one, which was kind of sad, but it was more of a like, oh, well, that was the best we could do. So that was a little bit unfortunate, but I did feel like I was spending a lot of time going back and forth a lot for that. And then the third thing that I focused my money on essentially were having the characters there, because that ended up being a big portion of our budget as well. But I really wanted my guests to have that like Disney experience. And number one, I had to have Mickey and Minnie because I couldn't not have Mickey and Minnie. And number two, since the Grand Californian is very like woodsy themed and Chip and Dale are everywhere, I had to have Chip and Dale because I can't not have Chip and Dale at the Grand Californian. So it was something that I convinced myself that I need all four of them, which ended up being a large portion of our time too, since going back to our like planning session, when we had our final planning session, they said that in Disneyland, the characters can't be kind of mingling. And I don't know if that's a change from what it used to be or if it's always been that way, but they couldn't just have them mingling with the guests, that the characters needed to be behind a backdrop while they were out. So if we wanted to have all four of them at the same time, we wouldn't be able to take pictures with larger groups because it would essentially take up too much of the photo. So she gave me the choice. She said, you can have all four of them, but they're going to be taking up most of the picture frame, like the boundaries of the photo, or you can split them up and they would each still get 30 minutes, but they would be two separate 30-minute meet and greets, which ultimately I ended up choosing. So characters were out for an hour of the reception total, which ended up being fine. I do wish that we could have had them mingling a little bit more. I don't know why it is that way at Disneyland, but that was essentially like what the planner and everybody had said, is that they have to be behind the backdrop the whole time. But it ended up being great. I think everybody really enjoyed having them. The line do the meet and greet with both of them were super long, and even all the adults who were like taking pictures, like, oh my gosh, it's Mickey and Minnie. And I knew that was going to be the reaction of a lot of people, so that's why I wanted to do it. I just wish they were able to mingle a little bit more.
Interesting. Okay. Were there any aspects that were less important where you saved your money or just your effort?
So you think when you're first planning your wedding, like, oh, floral and decor is the most important thing. Like the aesthetic is so important, which is what I thought when I was first starting to plan. But as different things started coming up, I realized that the floral and decor were not as important to me, and that I would rather keep my budget for the bar and the characters than for floral. And our floral and decor coordinator, Natalie, was super awesome. Like, I just kept cutting things because originally when we did our first planning session, and I was like, yes, I want this. Yes, I want a pedal border. Yes, I want full room draping. It came back astronomical. Like floral and decor by itself was $42,000. So I was like, can't do that. So I think we had like, I don't know, 10 different versions of it, but they were really awesome in helping me find an alternative. So definitely cut the full room draping. We just did uplighting instead. I cut having anything behind us because that was another thing that I've seen a lot of couples have, either a really big chair or like the storybook. And I was like, I don't know. I'm not going to be sitting there the whole time. I'm going to have other photos. I just couldn't convince myself that it was going to be worth paying so much for those extra things. Um, so I ended up cutting quite a bit, but it was still gorgeous. Like, I think if you look at our photos, you wouldn't think that I cut so much floral and decor. Like, I did get the shibari chairs because that was one thing I decided that I was going to get no matter what. But everything else, pretty much, I was like, no, I don't need that. No, I don't need that. Um, and the funny thing is, too, I didn't get a flower basket or like extra flowers for my flower girl. And it completely slipped my mind. It was something that I didn't even think, because I did see it on one of the things that you can purchase a flower basket, but I didn't think about it. And it came to when we're literally starting the ceremony, and our little flower girl was like, where's my basket? And I just like, my heart just like dropped. And I was like, oh my gosh, I didn't think about it. Like, it wasn't, I don't know. I just thought flowers would just be there. So fortunately, our day of coordinator is super awesome. She was like, we're going to get you flowers. So she went to, because I did have quite a bit in the aisles and on our golden arch, there was a few arrangements. So she just pulled some roses from there and like tore them apart and just gave them to her to like pass out in her hand. But there were things like that where like you needed to plan it in advance. Like, I got the boutonnieres. I didn't think to get the flower basket. That was just something that slipped my mind. So, anyways, the floral and decor definitely was not on my top priorities. And I think also something that we decided that we didn't want to spend too much on was the extravagancy of the cake. The cake was important. We wanted to have a cake, but I've seen so many like huge, like ginormous cakes with a bunch of fondant and all that stuff. And like my husband, he does some baking. He's not like a professional baker, but he dabbles in it. And he's like, I don't want fondant on my cake. Fondant is disgusting. So, and that was, one of the very few things that he was putting his foot down for, which I was totally fine with. I didn't want to spend $5,000 in a cake. So our cake was very small and very minimal, but it was still delicious. So the way that it looked didn't really bother either of us, and it still looked cute in photos. And I think the last thing was I didn't really do any other events other than the day of. We didn't do like a rehearsal dinner or like a welcome party or anything afterwards. I had originally considered trying to do like a World of Color or like a ride mix-in, but in the end, I think the day was enough for me, especially since we were leaving that night for our honeymoon. I wanted to do something quickly with people who are willing to low key, unofficially go to the park to ride a ride, and then we were going to head off to our honeymoon. So I didn't want to have a lot of extra things.
Got it. Did anything go wrong or just not turn out like you expected?
The rain was something we were worried about in the last couple days. My planner sent me an email on Friday saying, like, I have some backup locations for you in case it rains. And so that worried me a bit. But they handled it really well. Like, they gave me the option. I think at 7, maybe right before our first look, it had already started to rain. Um, and she said that we were in danger of having to move inside. She said that they were going to be moving their pre-reception inside, but she was going to try her best to keep the ceremony outside if that's what I wanted. So we were able to do that, luckily. It turned out fine. There was just a little bit more stress on me in the last couple days when every time I saw a cloud, I was like, oh no, I'm not going to be able to get married at the Brisa. And then, two, with the ceremony, because I knew that we had some guests drop out at the last minute, I was a little bit worried because I was so focused on my photos that the chairs in the ceremony were going to like look empty if we had more chairs than we did guests. And that was actually something that I asked in my planning session, like how were they were going to arrange the people if there were empty seats. And she had told me initially that they usually, once most people are seated, they ask them to kind of move inward. But because we had to start early, that didn't happen. So when I first like looked out after I like walked down the aisle and saw like this big gap of chairs, I was a little bit disappointed. But I would rather have the ceremony outside than have had waited and have them move people, and then we would have to move inside. And then the one thing that I would say for sure went wrong was that during our first dance at the reception, the DJ played the wrong song. And that was a partial miscommunication because when I first did the music worksheets, I had accidentally written down the song that I wanted for the father-daughter dance at the first dance song, and it's very clearly labeled. I think I was just exhausted from my long hours of work and just didn't proofread it enough, I guess. But I noticed it immediately and I emailed my planner and I was like, hey, I sent you this music worksheet, but like we got to switch the first dance for myself and my dad, or like, the father-daughter dance with our first dance. And she said, okay, I'll like let the DJ know. And that was before I knew who the DJ was going to be. And then during our final planning session, when everybody was on the online chat and she brought up the music worksheet and I saw it was still incorrect, I said, hey, we need to switch those two songs. And she said, okay, I'll make a note of it. And so I think she had said while she was trying to do it that she couldn't edit the document. So it was just a minor unfortunate thing that happened. It wasn't detrimental. And right away after I flagged my day of coordinator down and I was like, Jeannie, that was the wrong song. She was like, oh my gosh, we can, do another one if you want. And I said, no, we already got to do a private first dance. Nobody is going to tell. Like, that was another thing that I just kind of let go of. Like, I'm just going to play the same song for me and my dad. And if people think that, like, oh, it's the same song, then who cares? Like, it didn't bother me that much. So they did the best they could. I think it was just a miscommunication from my planner to the DJ. But everything else was awesome. They were so great. My day of coordinator was so awesome. I loved her. And yeah, it was, for the most part, pretty flawless.
Is there anything you would have done differently knowing what you know now?
Having such large wedding parties was very stressful. they were all super great. Most of them was my family, and I wanted to include everybody. But leading up to it, having so many people that I felt I was going to try to wrangle, and my maid of honor did super awesome in leading all of the bridesmaids, but having 8 bridesmaids was just a lot of people to make sure everybody was where they needed to be, which they were. But I think if we had a smaller wedding party, that would take a little bit of stress off of me while we were planning it and leading up to it, because that was probably something that was like stressing me out more than anything before. And I did really like having the 2 sets of characters. I just wish that they could have mingled a little bit more, because I didn't want to cut either set, but having them only at the backdrop for an entire hour of like people having to like wait in line, just it didn't sit super well with me, and nobody seemed to mind, and there was not one person who appeared bothered by it. But for me, it was something where I was like, oh, they could be having snacks or dancing and they're just waiting in line, which is, what so many people associate Disney with anyway. So I wouldn't have cut them, but it was just an unfortunate circumstance. So it would be something that I might think about a little bit more.
Interesting. Okay. Do you have any other tips or advice for future Disney couples?
Even Disneyland, which I've listened to your podcast, Carrie, so much. I've heard so many Disney World weddings and how there's so many different aspects of it, and it all comes together so beautifully. And Disneyland is a lot smaller, but they were on like the same level of meeting my expectations or passing my expectations of like me telling them this is what I want, and they brought it out. Like our reception space was beautiful, and I didn't need to stress about any of it. Like just showing up and being there and having the day of coordinator and your planner there. I don't know if Disney World has the planner there on the day of, but I think having both of them made me feel a lot more relaxed. I would also say that, kind of going back to I have so many people in my wedding party, because it was starting so early, I was very nervous that my wedding party was going to be able to make it on time. So I ended up booking 2 DVC villas, which were super gorgeous. The view from the villa was amazing, but that was probably something that I didn't need to take control of. I probably should have just trusted my wedding party to figure it out themselves, because then I incurred the cost of the 2 villas, which was fine. It ended up being okay, but that was just another thing of like, maybe I should let people do their own accommodation.
Well, Amanda, I think you've offered a lot of great tips and advice for anyone who's interested in getting married or having a vow renewal at Disneyland, and I appreciate your taking the time.
Thank you so much for having me.
That's our show for today. I'm your host, Carrie Hayward, inviting you to join me again next week for another episode of the Disney Wedding Podcast. Past shows and tons of photos for each episode are available on my website, DisneyWeddingPodcast.com, or listen in your favorite podcast app. And for instant answers to all your Walt Disney World wedding questions, check out Carrie Hayward's Fairy Tale Weddings Guide, available as an interactive ebook with continual free updates at fairytaleweddingsguide.com.